I found out my parents were planning to move my brother into my house while I was out of town. No permission, no warning. They already had a spare key, movers scheduled, and a story ready in case I objected. This wasn't about family help, it was about control. If I didn't act fast, I'd lose my home, my boundaries, and my future. So instead of confronting them, I set a trap. I didn't find out by accident. I found out because my parents have a habit of getting careless when they think they've already won. The message wasn't meant for me. It was meant for my mother's sister, sent late at night, the kind of message people send when they're excited and no longer careful. "We're finally doing it," she wrote. "He'll be settled in by the time she gets back. She won't have the heart to undo it." I stared at my phone for a full minute before the meaning sank in. Doing what? Settled where? And then my chest tightened, because I already knew the answer before my brain finished the sentence. My house. My parents were planning to move my brother into my house while I was out of town. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't paranoia. This was a plan already in motion. Movers. Timing. Confidence. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the assumption. The assumption that I wouldn't fight back. That I'd fold out of guilt. That I'd be painted as the villain if I said no. That fear sat heavy in my stomach, because history told me exactly how this would play out if I did nothing. My parents had always treated my boundaries like suggestions. My brother had always been the exception to every rule, and I had always been the one expected to sacrifice quietly so everyone else could stay comfortable. I bought this house myself. I worked for it. I budgeted, saved, skipped vacations, lived frugally while my brother bounced between jobs, apartments, and excuses. When I finally signed the papers, my parents congratulated me with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. I remember my mother saying, "It's nice you'll have extra space now." I remember my father adding, "Family helps family." At the time, I thought they were just words. I didn't realize they were laying groundwork. The trip was supposed to be simple. 5 days away. A work conference I couldn't miss. I'd already told them weeks earlier. I'd even joked, "Don't worry, the house will survive without me." My father laughed a little too hard. My brother didn't say anything at all. That should have been my first real warning. Silence has always been his tell. When he's quiet, it means he's waiting for someone else to do the dirty work. As I reread the message, the stakes became painfully clear. If I let this happen, it wouldn't stop at a suitcase on the couch. He wouldn't just need a few weeks. He never did. He'd bring furniture. He'd change the locks for safety. He'd stop contributing financially, because he always did. And my parents would defend him every step of the way, reminding me how selfish I was for caring more about my space than my family. I could already hear the lectures. I could already feel the pressure. I could already see myself standing in my own living room, suddenly a guest in a house I paid for. And here's the part people who haven't lived this don't understand. Once someone moves in, getting them out becomes 10 times harder. Emotionally, legally, socially. If you push back too late, you're no longer defending boundaries, you're breaking the family apart. That label sticks. It follows you to holidays, to phone calls, to every conversation where your name is said with a sigh. That was the real danger. Not just losing control of my home, but being trapped in a narrative where I was always wrong for protecting myself. I sat there, phone in hand, heart pounding, and realized something terrifying. They weren't asking, they were executing. They'd already decided I didn't deserve a say, and if I confronted them directly, they'd deny it, gaslight me, accuse me of overreacting, and then continue anyway, just more quietly. I had tried the direct approach my entire life. It never worked. It only taught them how to hide better. That's when the fear shifted into something else. Clarity. I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like someone who needed to protect her future. If they believed I was powerless, I needed them to keep believing that. If they thought I'd be gone and oblivious, I needed to let them think that too. Confrontation would fail. Pleading would fail. Emotional appeals would fail. But planning was something they didn't expect from me. I didn't cancel my trip. That part is important. I packed my bag, booked my flight, and played my role perfectly. I joked with my mother on the phone. I reassured my father I'd be unreachable during meetings. I even mentioned how relieved I was that they could check on the house while I was gone. That detail mattered. I needed them comfortable. I needed them confident. People make mistakes when they think they're safe. And before I go any further, listen closely. If you've ever had family cross a line and felt your stomach drop the way mine did, subscribe now. Not later. Not after the story. Now. Because this channel isn't for people with perfect families. It's for people who know exactly how dangerous entitlement wrapped in love can be. And if you're watching this and thinking, I wouldn't subscribe because I don't like drama, explain that in the comments. Explain why protecting yourself makes you uncomfortable. I'm genuinely curious. Because here's the truth no one tells you. The moment I boarded that plane, my parents believed they had already won. They believed I was leaving my house unguarded, my boundaries undefended, my voice temporarily silenced. They believed I'd come home to a fait accompli and swallow it like I always had. What they didn't know was that every detail they'd overlooked was already being turned against them. And what could go wrong next wasn't just inconvenient, it was irreversible. The moment I cleared airport security, I didn't feel relief. I felt exposed, like I'd just walked away from something fragile and irreplaceable. Every announcement over the loudspeaker sounded distant, muffled by the noise in my head, replaying that message over and over. He'll be settled in by the time she gets back. Settled, as if my home were an empty hotel room waiting for its next guest. As if my life were something they could rearrange while I was gone and expect me to adapt quietly afterward. I boarded the plane with a smile I didn't feel and took my seat by the window. From the outside, I probably looked like any other traveler scrolling through her phone, sipping water, waiting for takeoff. Inside, I was running scenarios. If they moved his things in, what would I do first? If they changed the locks, who would I call? If they claimed I had agreed verbally, how would I prove I hadn't? Every possibility came with consequences, and every consequence came with one common thread. Once this crossed a certain line, I couldn't undo it without becoming the bad guy. That's when I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. I pulled up my calendar and counted the days again. 5 days. Not long, but long enough for damage to be done if I let it. Movers could be booked. Utilities could be temporarily switched. My brother could establish residency. My parents knew this. They weren't careless. They were calculated, which meant I had to be too. The first thing I did was call my neighbor, Paula. She's retired, observant, and has lived on the street longer than anyone else. We've exchanged keys before for packages and emergencies. And more importantly, she doesn't like my parents. She's never said it outright, but I've seen the way her smile tightens when they're around. I asked her casually if she'd be home the next few days. She laughed and said she rarely goes anywhere. Then I asked her the real question. If you see anyone going in and out of my house while I'm gone, could you let me know? I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. She paused for a second and said, Of course. Dear, I'll keep an eye out. Next, I logged into my home security app. Cameras inside, cameras outside, motion alerts, entry logs. Everything was active. Everything was backed up to the cloud, and everything sent notifications directly to my phone. I'd installed the system for peace of mind months ago, never imagining it would be used against my own family. But peace of mind isn't just about strangers. Sometimes it's about the people who think they're entitled to your space. Then came the hardest part. I had to make sure my parents didn't suspect anything. That meant no confrontations, no passive-aggressive texts, no sudden boundaries that would alert them something was wrong. I answered my mother's calls. I laughed at my father's jokes. I even told my brother to take care of mom and dad while I was gone, knowing full well they were taking care of him. Every word I spoke was chosen carefully, like stepping across thin ice without letting it crack. On the second day of my trip, it happened. I was sitting in a conference room pretending to listen to a presentation when my phone vibrated softly against the table. Motion detected. Front door. I didn't even blink outwardly. Inside, my pulse spiked so hard it felt like it hit my throat. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and pulled up the live feed. There they were. My parents, my brother, and two men I didn't recognize carrying boxes. They didn't knock. They unlocked the door. I watched my father gesture inside like he owned the place. I watched my brother walk in behind him carrying a duffel bag slung casually over his shoulder, like he was arriving somewhere temporary, somewhere he had every right to be. My mother hovered near the door, looking nervous but not hesitant enough to stop it. No one looked conflicted. No one looked guilty. They looked efficient. That was the moment the emotional part of me finally shut down. Because here's the truth. If I had called them then, if I had screamed or cried or demanded they stop, they would have turned it around instantly. They would have told me I was overreacting, that it was just for now, that I could talk about it when I got back. And by then, my brother would already be living there. That was the trap. And I wasn't walking into it. Instead, I took screenshots, timestamps, faces, boxes, entry logs showing the code used, evidence, quiet, unarguable proof. I forwarded everything to my personal email and backed it up twice. I didn't want a story. I wanted facts. Then I called my parents. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I didn't even mention the cameras. I asked how things were going back home. My mother hesitated, just long enough for me to hear the lie forming. "Oh, fine," she said. "Quiet. You know how it is." I smiled to myself. Quiet. With movers in my living room. I told her the conference was exhausting, that I might be hard to reach for the rest of the day. She sounded relieved. My father got on the line briefly and reminded me to enjoy myself. My brother didn't speak at all. He didn't need to. He thought he was already winning. That night, alone in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself feel it. The anger, the disbelief, the grief of realizing that my parents didn't just ignore my boundaries. They actively planned around them. They counted on my absence. They counted on my silence. They counted on the version of me who would come home, see what had happened, and give in to keep the peace. That version of me didn't exist anymore. And if you're watching this thinking, "I'd never let it get this far," subscribe anyway. Because no one thinks it will until it does. And if you're choosing not to subscribe because you believe family would never do this to you, leave a comment explaining why. Tell me what makes you so sure. Sometimes certainty is a luxury people like us don't get, because at that point, the risk wasn't theoretical anymore. My brother was inside my house. My parents were complicit, and if I made the wrong move next, I could lose control of everything I'd built. What could go wrong now wasn't small. It wasn't emotional. It was permanent. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was panicking, but because my brain had switched into a different mode entirely. The kind that stops asking why would they do this, and starts asking how far are they willing to go. That distinction matters, because once you accept that someone is capable of crossing a line, the only mistake left is underestimating how many more lines they'll cross if you let them. I lay there staring at the hotel ceiling, replaying the footage again and again. My father unlocking the door. My brother walking in like he belonged there. Boxes stacked neatly in my living room. This was an impulse. This was choreography. By morning, I had a plan. The key wasn't to stop them immediately. Stopping them would escalate things before I was ready. The key was to let them continue long enough to expose themselves fully. People who believe they're entitled always overreach. They don't just take what they need. They take what they think they deserve. And that arrogance creates evidence. I opened my laptop and logged into my smart home dashboard. Every room camera was still live. Motion logs showed activity late into the night. Lights turning on and off. My brother pacing. Drawers opening. Closets being searched. At one point, I watched him sit on my couch, eating something from my fridge like this was already home. That's when I realized something critical. He wasn't just moving in temporarily. He was settling. and my parents weren't planning to ask forgiveness later. They were planning to present me with a finished reality and dare me to undo it. That's when I took the next step. I emailed my lawyer. Not a dramatic message, not an emotional one. Just facts. Unauthorized entry, video evidence, third parties present, potential unlawful occupancy. I attached screenshots, timestamps, and entry logs. Then I wrote one sentence that mattered more than anything else. I did not consent to any of this. Because consent is the difference between a family dispute and a legal problem, and I needed it documented before they tried to rewrite the story. Then I called my insurance company. Again, calm, precise. I asked what would happen if someone damaged my property while I was out of town without my permission. I asked about liability. I asked about coverage. And I asked what steps I should take if I suspected unauthorized occupancy. The agent paused longer than usual before answering. That pause told me everything. I followed every instruction she gave me. Emails, case number, notes added to my file, quiet protection built in advance. By the afternoon, the messages started coming in. My mother texted first. Just checking in. Hope the trip is going well. My father followed with, let us know if you need anything while you're away. That one almost made me laugh. They weren't checking on me. They were checking to see how close I was to finding out. My brother stayed silent, which told me even more. Silence means comfort. Silence means he thought this was done. So I gave them exactly what they expected. I replied late, apologetic, distracted. I told them the conference schedule was insane, that I barely had time to breathe, that I trusted them to handle things back home if anything came up. My mother sent a heart emoji. My father said, of course. The lie sat there between us, thick and heavy, and they didn't even flinch. That night Paula called, not texted, called. Her voice was tight. Sweetheart, she said, there are people coming in and out of your house again today. Trucks this time. I didn't want to alarm you, but it doesn't look temporary. I thanked her and told her she did the right thing. After we hung up, I checked the cameras again. More boxes, furniture, my brother's mattress carried inside, my parents supervising like project managers. That's when I realized the most dangerous part of this wasn't the house. It was the story they were preparing to tell when I got back. They would say I offered it. They would say it was discussed. They would say my brother had nowhere else to go. They would say I changed my mind. They would say family helps family. And if I protested too loudly, I would become the unreasonable one, the selfish one, the daughter who abandoned her own parents in their time of need. That narrative was already forming. I could feel it. So I decided the trap wouldn't be confrontation. It would be timing. Because if you catch people mid-scheme, they argue. If you catch them after they've fully committed, they panic. And panic makes people sloppy. Panic makes people admit things they shouldn't. Panic makes truth leak out. If you're watching this and thinking, this feels extreme, subscribe now. Because people don't just wake up one day to betrayal like this. It builds quietly while you're being polite. And if you're not subscribing because you think you'd notice sooner, comment and explain why. Tell me what signal you think you'd catch before it was too late. Because at this point, the stakes were clear. If I moved too early, I'd look hysterical. If I waited too long, my brother could claim residency. And if that happened, getting my house back wouldn't be emotional. It would be legal, slow, expensive, and brutal. So I waited. And while I waited, they kept making one mistake after another. By the third day, they stopped pretending. That's always the moment you need to watch for the shift from secrecy to entitlement. My brother stopped tiptoeing around the house and started acting like a landlord. He rearranged the living room. He moved my desk out of the spare bedroom and replaced it with his gaming setup. He took my framed photos off the walls and stacked them face down in a closet. Not thrown away, just removed. Like my life was an inconvenience he planned to store until further notice. My parents hovered in the background, nodding, approving, correcting him gently when he put something in the wrong place. They weren't guests, they were supervisors. I watched all of it from 1,200 miles away, my stomach tight but my hands steady, because this was the confirmation I needed. This was no longer about helping him for a bit. This was a takeover, and more importantly, it was deliberate. People don't bring mattresses and routers and filing cabinets into a house they think they'll be leaving soon. They don't change Wi-Fi passwords unless they think they own the space. And yes, he changed the Wi-Fi password. I got the notification instantly. That one almost broke my composure. Not because it surprised me, but because it revealed how confident he felt. He thought I was irrelevant to the outcome. That confidence was the opening. I logged into my utility accounts next. Electricity, water, internet. I didn't shut anything off that would have tipped my hand too early. Instead, I added alerts, usage spikes, login attempts, billing changes. Every move they made would now create a digital footprint they couldn't erase later. Then I forwarded all the camera footage from the last 72 hours to a secure drive and shared access with my lawyer. No commentary, no emotion, just evidence, neatly organized, time-stamped, undeniable. That afternoon my father called, not texted, called. "Hey," he said, overly casual, the way people sound when they're about to lie and want you relaxed first. "Just wanted to let you know everything's fine at the house. Your brother's been helping us with a few things." Helping us. Interesting phrasing. I let him talk. I made the mistake years ago of interrupting. People reveal more when you let them fill the silence themselves. He rambled about small repairs, about how it made sense for everyone, about how I wouldn't want the house sitting empty while I was gone. I didn't correct him. I didn't ask questions. I just said, "Okay." And the relief in his exhale told me he thought he'd won. After the call, my phone buzzed again. My mother this time. "Sweetheart, your brother's been so stressed lately. This arrangement is really helping him get back on his feet." There it was. The emotional framing. Not a question. A justification. I replied with something non-committal and put the phone face down on the table. They believed I was boxed in by guilt. They believed I'd cave quietly when confronted with a finished situation. What they didn't realize was that every message, every call, every sentence was building a record. And records matter when stories start changing. That evening, Paula sent another message, this one shorter. "They're throwing out some things." I felt my jaw tighten. I checked the camera feed immediately. My brother dragging bags toward the trash. I zoomed in. Old notebooks, clothes, a box of letters I'd kept from college. Nothing valuable financially, everything valuable emotionally. That's when the anger finally surfaced, not loud, not explosive, but cold and focused. Because now it wasn't just about space. It was about erasure. They weren't just moving him in, they were removing me. If you're watching this and thinking, "I'd lose it right here," pause and subscribe. Because the hardest part of situations like this isn't anger, it's restraint. And if you think restraint is weakness, comment and tell me why. I want to hear how you think reacting immediately would have made this better. That night, I booked my flight home. Not the one I told them about. An earlier one. Quiet. Unannounced. I didn't message anyone. I didn't hint. I didn't change my routine online. I wanted them relaxed, complacent, deep in the assumption that they controlled the timeline. Because when people believe they're safe, they stop watching their words. They stop checking their stories. They stop locking doors. Before I went to sleep, I set the final piece in motion. I scheduled a maintenance visit through my security company. Routine inspection. Legal. Documented. A neutral third party entering the house while I was still officially out of town. Someone who didn't belong to the family. Someone who would write a report. Someone who would note unauthorized occupants, changed locks, altered access. Someone whose word carried weight because they had no emotional stake in the situation. Then I closed my laptop, because at this point, the trap was complete. They had overcommitted. They had lied. They had altered my home. They had displaced my belongings. And they had done all of it while believing I was too far away, too distracted, too conditioned to stop them. They were wrong. And the moment I walked back through that front door, Everything they thought they controlled was about to turn against them. I landed just after sunrise. No messages, no warnings, no dramatic arrival. I took a rideshare straight from the airport, watched the city wake up through the window, and felt an odd calm settle in my chest. This wasn't adrenaline. This was clarity. When you stop hoping people will do the right thing, you stop being surprised when they don't, and that makes you dangerous in a very quiet way. The house looked different before I even stepped inside. Not damaged, not broken, just altered. My car wasn't in the driveway anymore. His was, parked crooked, like it belonged there. The porch light was still on from the night before. My welcome mat had been moved to the side, half folded, like someone hadn't bothered to put it back correctly. Small things. But small things tell the truth when people lie. I unlocked the door with my key. It worked barely. The lock resisted for half a second, then gave. Inside, the air smelled different, not stale, lived in, chooge. The sound hit me next. Voices. My brother laughing. My mother in the kitchen. A television on in the living room. Not startled voices, comfortable ones. The kind you don't use when you think you're trespassing. I stepped fully inside and closed the door behind me. The silence was instant, heavy. My brother froze mid-sentence. My mother's hand hovered over the counter. My father stood up slowly, like his body needed time to catch up to the shock on his face. No one spoke. They were all trying to recalibrate, trying to understand how I was standing there when the story they'd rehearsed didn't include me. "You're early," my father said finally. That told me everything. Not "why are you here?" Not "we didn't expect you." Just early. Like my presence was inevitable, just poorly timed. I looked around the room slowly, deliberately. Took in the rearranged furniture, the missing desk, the gaming console where my work computer used to be, the boxes stacked in the corner, my things, labeled in my handwriting, taped shut by someone else. My brother recovered first. He always did. "Relax," he said, holding up a hand like I was the problem. "We were gonna tell you. Mom just needed help, and you weren't here." And it made sense. Made sense. That phrase again. It's amazing how often people use logic to excuse theft when the victim is family. "I didn't agree to this," I said. My voice didn't shake. That seemed to unsettle them more than if I'd yelled. My mother stepped forward. "You're being dramatic. This is temporary." Temporary is what people say when they don't intend to leave. I walked past them without asking permission. Down the hallway. Into my bedroom. Or what used to be my bedroom. The bed was gone, replaced with an air mattress. My dresser drawers had been emptied halfway. Some clothes folded, some missing. I opened the closet. Shoes rearranged. His shoes. My stomach tightened, not in shock, but in confirmation. Everything I'd prepared for was right here, breathing in front of me. I turned back toward the hallway. "Who changed the Wi-Fi password?" I asked. My brother shrugged. I needed better speeds. That was it, the final piece. Not just presence, control. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen once. The front door chimed. Then there was a knock, firm, professional. Everyone turned. My father frowned. "Who is that?" "I scheduled a routine inspection," I said. "Security company?" My brother scoffed. "You can't just..." The knock came again, louder. I opened the door. A uniformed technician stood there, tablet in hand, neutral expression, body camera clipped to his chest. He glanced inside, eyes moving quickly over the room. The people, the boxes. "Ma'am," he said, "are these the individuals you authorized to be occupying the residence?" "No," I said, clear, calm, documented. Behind me, the temperature dropped. If you're watching this thinking, "This is where it gets ugly," subscribe now, because this is where people realize guilt doesn't protect them from consequences. And if you think I should have talked it out instead, comment that. I want to see who still believes boundaries are negotiable. The technician nodded and began typing. "I'll need identification from everyone present." My father's voice sharpened. "This is unnecessary." "It's policy," the technician replied, not looking up. "Unauthorized occupancy requires documentation." That's when my mother's tone changed. Softer. Fragile. Honey, please. Let's not make this a big thing. But it already was. Because while they were focused on the man with the tablet, they hadn't noticed what I'd done next. I walked to the breaker panel and opened it. I didn't cut the power. I didn't touch a switch. I just stood there long enough for them to notice I could. "This ends today," I said. "You don't get to move people into my house. You don't get to touch my things. You don't get to decide what I tolerate." My brother laughed nervously. "You're overreacting." I turned to him. "You changed my Wi-Fi password." Silence. That's when the technician cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to me, "based on what I'm seeing, you may want to contact local authorities to formalize removal." I nodded. "Already did." The sound of sirens outside wasn't loud yet. Distant. Approaching. And in that moment, before anyone was asked to leave, before words turned into records, before the trap snapped shut completely, I saw it on their faces. They finally understood. They had mistaken distance for weakness, and now there was nowhere left to stand. The sirens didn't rush. They never do. They arrive slow, deliberate, like time stretching just to make sure everyone feels it. My mother's hand went to her chest. My brother's jaw tightened. My father didn't move at all. He just stared at me, trying to calculate whether authority still lived in his voice. It didn't. The technician stepped aside as the knock came again, this time answered by uniform. 2 officers. Calm. Neutral. Already briefed. That's the part people underestimate. When you prepare, chaos doesn't look chaotic. It looks organized. "Good morning," the taller officer said, eyes scanning the room. "We received a call regarding unauthorized occupancy." My father stepped forward. "This is a misunderstanding. We're her parents." The officer nodded once. "That may be true, but ownership determines access, not relation." That sentence hit harder than any shout ever could. I stood still. Let them talk. Let them explain. Every word they offered only dug the hole deeper. My mother cried softly, the way she always did when consequences showed up uninvited. My brother tried humor, then irritation, then silence. None of it worked. The officers asked for IDs. My brother hesitated. That hesitation mattered. It told them everything they needed to know. "Sir," the shorter officer said, "do you have a lease, written permission, or any legal documentation authorizing your stay?" My brother looked at my parents. They looked at me. I said nothing. Silence is powerful when you're no longer afraid of it. "No," my brother muttered. The officer wrote something down. "Then you'll need to gather your belongings." That's when panic finally broke through the entitlement. Not anger. Panic, because up until now, they'd believed this was a conversation. Conversations can be steered. This wasn't one anymore. My mother rushed toward me. "Please," she whispered. "You're tearing the family apart." I met her eyes. "No, I'm stopping you from tearing me apart." If you've ever been told setting boundaries makes you cruel, hit subscribe now. Stories like this don't end cleanly, but they end honestly. And if that scares you, tell me why in the comments. The officers gave them time. 15 minutes. Supervised. Enough to gather essentials. Not enough to take advantage. My brother stomped down the hallway, yanking drawers open. He tried to grab my spare laptop. I shook my head once. The officer intervened. "That doesn't belong to you." My father watched it all unfold like a man attending his own eviction. He didn't shout, didn't plead. He just kept shaking his head, over and over, as if denial could rewrite reality. When my mother reached for a framed photo, one I had bought, one I had paid to have restored, the officer stopped her too. "Ma'am, that stays." She let it fall back onto the shelf like it burned. 10 minutes later, they stood in the entryway with bags that looked far smaller than their confidence had been. The officer turned to me. "Do you want a trespass notice filed?" "Yes," I said. That word landed heavy. My brother spun toward me. "You're really doing this?" I didn't raise my voice. "You did this." The officer handed him the notice, explained the terms, explained what would happen if they returned without permission, explained consequences in a language entitlement finally understands. When the door closed behind them, the house exhaled. I stood there for a moment, listening. No TV, no voices, just the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing, steady and unbroken. The technician cleared his throat. "I'll finish the security upgrades now." "Please," I said. As he worked, I walked through every room, checked every drawer, every closet, every surface they'd touched. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about reclaiming space. Ownership isn't just legal, it's emotional. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We raised you better than this." I didn't respond. Another from my father. This didn't have to be ugly. Still nothing. Then my brother. "You'll regret this." That one made me smile, because regret only lives where doubt does. And I didn't have any left. If you're still watching, you already know why this matters. Because when family decides they own you, silence is permission. And permission is how traps are set for you. Subscribe, because the next part isn't about what they did. It's about what I did next. And that's where everything changed. I thought the worst part was over. That's the lie people tell themselves when silence finally arrives. Silence doesn't mean peace. Silence means regrouping. And my parents were very good at regrouping. The first sign came 3 days later. Not a call, not a text, a letter, handwritten, left in my mailbox like something gentle, like something reasonable, like something meant to pull me back into the role I'd finally escaped. I stood at the counter holding it unopened for a full minute. My name written in my mother's looping script, the same handwriting she used on permission slips, birthday cards, apology notes that were never really apologies. I already knew what was inside. I opened it anyway. It wasn't angry. That was the dangerous part. It was soft, sad, carefully wounded. She wrote about misunderstandings, about stress, about how families lose their way sometimes. She reminded me of sacrifices they made when I was younger. Long hours, hard choices, things I never asked for but was always expected to repay. Then came the line designed to break me. "We don't know where we went wrong with you." There it was. Not accountability, not reflection. A subtle rewrite of reality where I was the problem that suddenly appeared. My hands didn't shake this time, because something had shifted. When you see manipulation clearly, it loses its power. It becomes boring, predictable, almost sad. At the bottom of the letter was an invitation. Dinner. Neutral location. Just to talk. That phrase should come with a warning label. If you've ever been pulled back into a toxic cycle because someone said, "Let's just talk," subscribe now. Seriously, because what happened next is exactly why people like us need to hear these stories before it's too late. I didn't respond. Not that day. Not the next. Silence isn't cruelty. It's data. And I wanted to see what they'd do without access to me. The answer came fast. My neighbor texted me while I was at work. "Hey, just checking, are your parents supposed to be parked outside your house?" My stomach didn't drop. It hardened. I pulled up my security app. Live feed. There they were. My mother pacing. My father standing stiff. My brother leaning against his car. Arms crossed like he was waiting for a store to open. They hadn't come to talk. They had come to apply pressure. Public pressure. The kind designed to make you panic, rush home, apologize just to make the scene stop. I didn't leave work. Instead, I forwarded the footage to the same officer who had filed the trespass notice. Then I waited. If this makes you uncomfortable, good. Because this is where most people cave. This is where they break. This is where they teach their family that boundaries are temporary. Don't subscribe if you plan to cave. But if you want to see what happens when someone doesn't, stay with me. The police arrived before I did. I watched from my phone as the officer spoke to them. Watched my mother cry again, louder this time. Watched my father gesture toward the house like it still belonged to him by emotional right. The officer didn't budge. "Ma'am, sir, you were warned. This is your second notice." Second notice. That phrase carries weight. My brother started yelling. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the posture. The same one he used growing up when consequences were new and unacceptable. The officer pointed toward the road. Leave. Now. They did. This time faster. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. Safer. Not because they were gone, but because they had tried again and failed. That's how you know a boundary is real. When it survives a second test. Inside, I sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling. Not tired. Not scared. Clear. That's when the realization hit. This wasn't about them moving my brother in. That was just the excuse. This was about control. About access. About the unspoken belief that my life was a shared resource they could redistribute whenever it suited them. And now that belief was cracking. People don't rage when they lose a house. They rage when they lose entitlement. If you've ever felt that rage pointed at you, subscribe. Because in the next part, they stop pretending to be victims. They start trying to punish me. And that's where the trap truly closes. Punishment doesn't always come as shouting. Sometimes it arrives disguised as concern. The morning after the police sent them away, my phone exploded not from my parents, but from people I barely spoke to anymore. An aunt, a cousin, a family friend who used to call me such a good girl. The message was always the same, just rewritten. Your mom is devastated. Your dad isn't sleeping. Your brother is really struggling. Not once did anyone ask if I was okay. Not once did anyone ask why I'd needed the police involved. They already knew the story they'd been told. And it painted me as the villain. This is how punishment works in families like mine. They don't confront you directly. They outsource the guilt. They turn your silence into a crisis, and your boundary into an attack. If you've ever been ambushed by third-party guilt, subscribe right now. Because what happens next is exactly why ignoring it is the only move that works. I didn't respond to a single message. Not because I was being cruel, but because I finally understood the rules of the game. Every response resets the cycle. Every explanation invites debate. Every defense assumes you're on trial. So I stayed quiet. And that's when they escalated. 2 days later, I received an email from my parents' lawyer. Not threatening. Worse. Seeking clarification. They claimed there had been a miscommunication regarding access to my property. They suggested my parents had reasonable expectations due to past family arrangements. They requested a meeting to resolve matters amicably. Translation: they were trying to create a paper trail. They wanted to look reasonable, cooperative, concerned. They wanted something they could later wave around and say, "See? We tried." I forwarded the email to my own attorney. Yes, I had one now. No, I didn't feel dramatic about it. If you think getting legal protection against family is extreme, don't subscribe. But if you understand that love without respect is just control wearing perfume, you're in the right place. My attorney replied with 3 sentences. Any further attempts to access the property will be considered harassment. All communication must go through legal counsel. Do not contact my client again. That should have ended it. It didn't, because punishment isn't about resolution. It's about making you feel small. The next attack came at work. My manager called me into her office, concern written all over her face. She closed the door gently and asked, "Is everything okay at home?" My chest tightened. Someone had contacted my workplace. Anonymous. Worried. Family concerned about her mental state. Just wanted to make sure she's okay. My parents hadn't gotten access to my house, so they tried to get access to my reputation. That's when fear tried to creep in. Not panic fear with paperwork. Fear with consequences. This is the moment most people fold. This is where they rush to appease, to smooth things over, to prove they're not crazy. I didn't. I told the truth, calmly, factually, with documentation, security footage, police reports, legal correspondence. My manager listened. Then she did something unexpected. She apologized to me. And then she asked if I needed time off. That was the moment I realized something important. Their power only worked in environments where I stayed silent. Outside of that, it dissolved. If you're watching this and still thinking silence protects you, subscribe. Because silence only protects abusers. Documentation protects you. That night, my brother finally broke his silence. He called, not angry, not yelling. He sounded tired. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You're tearing the family apart." I almost laughed. Families like ours don't fall apart because someone sets boundaries. They fall apart because the truth finally stops being hidden. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I said one sentence. I didn't change. I stopped lying. He hung up. And that's when I knew the trap had fully closed. Because they had tried guilt. They had tried pressure. They had tried legal intimidation. They had tried social sabotage. And none of it worked. In the next part, they make one last move, the one they think will force me back into line. And it backfires in a way they never saw coming. If you're still here, subscribe now. Because walking away is powerful, but watching control collapse when it can't reach you anymore is something you don't want to miss. The final move always comes wrapped in desperation. 3 days after my brother's call, I came home to a notice taped neatly to my front door. Not shoved, not threatening, carefully placed, like someone wanted it to look official and calm. It was a handwritten note from my mother, not mailed, not emailed, delivered in person. "I know you don't want to speak to us right now, but this has gone too far. We're worried about you. Please call. We need to fix this before something irreversible happens." That sentence wasn't an accident. Before something irreversible happens, that's the phrase people use when they want to imply danger without saying it out loud. It plants fear. It suggests instability. It sets a stage. I didn't tear the note down. I photographed it. Then I checked my security footage. My parents had been back, not forcing the door, not knocking, standing on my porch for almost 15 minutes, talking quietly, gesturing toward the lock, toward the windows, toward the street. My father paced. My mother wiped her eyes dramatically. And then this is the part that mattered most. My mother placed the note and stepped back, looking directly at the camera. They wanted to be seen. They wanted proof. They tried. That's when the trap fully snapped shut. Because the moment they crossed from boundary breaking into narrative building, everything changed. I sent the footage to my attorney. Her reply was immediate. "They're escalating. We need to move fast." By the next morning, my parents had done exactly what she predicted. They filed a wellness check, not out of concern, out of control. 2 officers knocked on my door just after 9 a.m. Polite, professional, calm. They explained my parents were concerned for my safety and had reported that I was isolating, distressed, and possibly unable to care for myself. Sound familiar? It should. This is the nuclear option in families like mine. When access is denied, they go after autonomy. They don't say, "She's disobedient." They say, "She's unwell." But here's the thing they didn't expect. I was ready. I invited the officers inside, offered them water, sat at my kitchen table, handed them a folder, police reports, security footage, attorney correspondence, screenshots of messages, the handwritten note. I explained calmly that my parents had attempted to move someone into my home without consent, had been warned not to return, and were now retaliating through false reports. The officers exchanged a look. One of them sighed. "We see this more often than people think," he said. They left after 10 minutes. Not with me. With a warning for my parents. And here's the part no one tells you about control. When it fails publicly, it collapses privately. Within hours, my parents' tone shifted. No more concern, just anger. My voicemail filled up. "You embarrassed us. How could you involve the police? You've gone too far this time." Not once did they ask if I was okay. Not once did they apologize. They weren't scared for me. They were scared of losing leverage. That afternoon, my attorney filed for a formal no-contact order. Not dramatic, necessary. And once that paperwork was filed, the noise stopped. No messages, no notes, no surprise visits. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the defeated kind. My brother texted me once more. Short, sharp. "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Because happiness wasn't the point. Freedom was. And freedom doesn't need witnesses. It needs distance. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened after the silence settled, what I discovered about my family's plan, what they'd already arranged while I was supposed to be away, and why setting the trap didn't just protect my house, it protected my future. If you've ever been painted as the problem for refusing to be used, subscribe right now. And if you're still hesitating, drop a comment explaining why, because the people who relate to this story already know exactly what's at stake. The silence didn't last because silence never does in families built on entitlement. It only lasted long enough for me to uncover what they had already done. 2 days after the wellness check failed, I got an email from my HOA. Polite, neutral, carefully worded. They were following up on a request submitted on my behalf regarding long-term occupancy changes and spare key authorization. On my behalf, I called immediately. The woman on the line sounded confused. We received a signed form requesting temporary access approval for your parents and an additional occupant. It was dated for the week you were scheduled to be out of town. My stomach dropped, but my voice didn't. Can you tell me who submitted it? There was a pause. Keyboard clicks. It appears to have been delivered in person. Signed with your name. That's when the full picture finally came into focus. They hadn't been planning to move my brother in. They had already tried. They forged my signature. They submitted paperwork. They coordinated timing around my trip. They rehearsed the story. This wasn't impulse. It was strategy. I asked the HOA to email me copies of everything. The forms, the signatures, the dates. And when I opened the attachment, I didn't feel panic. I felt clarity. Because the signature wasn't even close. Sloppy. Rushed. Confident no one would check. I forwarded everything to my attorney. Her response came back in less than 5 minutes. This is no longer just harassment. This is fraud. That word carries weight. Fraud doesn't care about family dynamics. Fraud doesn't care about intent. Fraud cares about evidence. And suddenly I had plenty. The HOA flagged the submission internally. The access request was voided. A formal incident report was logged. My parents were now documented, not emotional, not misunderstood, but recorded. And once people like that realize there's a paper trail, they panic. The calls started again, from unknown numbers, from blocked IDs, from my brother using a different tone now. You didn't have to take it this far. Dad's really stressed. Mom hasn't been sleeping. Still not sorry. Just uncomfortable. I saved every message. Then I stopped answering. Because here's the truth no one warns you about. When you finally step out of a controlling family system, they don't miss you. They miss access. They miss convenience. They miss the version of you that absorbed consequences for them. And once that version is gone, they scramble. By the end of the week, my attorney filed an amendment to the no contact order. Forgery. False reporting. Attempted unlawful occupancy. It was airtight. The order was granted. My parents were legally barred from contacting me, approaching my home, or involving third parties to reach me, including my brother. That's when the guilt campaign died. Not because they understood, because they couldn't bypass the law. And something strange happened after that. I slept. For the first time in years, I slept without bracing for the sound of a key in the lock. I came home without scanning the driveway. I stopped rehearsing arguments in my head. My house became mine again. Not emotionally. Legally? Psychologically. Finally. But here's the part that matters most, and why I'm telling you this. If I hadn't set that trap, if I hadn't installed the cameras, documented everything, and stayed calm when they escalated, I would have come home from that trip to a changed lock, a temporary occupant, and a family insisting I was overreacting. They would have moved the goalposts. They always do. And I would have been the one scrambling. Instead, they were. If this story makes your chest tighten, subscribe now, not later, now, because the people who need these stories most are usually the ones still explaining themselves to people who will never listen. And if you're thinking, this could never happen to me, I want you to comment why, because denial is the first tool controlling families rely on. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened months later, how my brother finally admitted the truth, what my parents lost because they couldn't respect a boundary, and why the trap didn't just protect my house. It ended the cycle. And once a cycle ends, it doesn't get restarted. It gets remembered. Months passed without noise, And that silence told me everything I needed to know. Not the peaceful kind of silence you get when things are resolved, but the brittle, forced quiet that comes when people realize they've lost leverage. My parents didn't change. They stalled. They waited. People like that always believe time will soften you back into compliance. What they didn't account for was distance doing the opposite. Because once I wasn't reacting anymore, I started seeing things clearly, patterns I'd normalized my entire life. My brother didn't call for months. Not to apologize, not to explain, just absence. And then, one afternoon, he showed up at my workplace. Not inside, outside, standing across the street like someone who knew they weren't welcome but hoped proximity alone might work. I didn't approach him. I watched. He looked smaller than I remembered. Less certain. Like someone who'd lost the protection of always being backed up. Eventually, he texted, "I know I'm not supposed to contact you. I just need 5 minutes." I forwarded the message to my attorney. She replied with one sentence, "If you choose to speak, do it in public and document everything." So I met him at a cafe 2 blocks away. Daylight, cameras, witnesses. He sat down across from me and didn't order anything. That alone told me this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about pressure. "They're losing the house," he said finally. "Not we. The mortgage payments had fallen behind. The credit lines were frozen. The accounts my father had quietly siphoned from were under review. And without me as the fallback, without my name, my credit, my silence, everything was collapsing faster than they'd expected." "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. "Not fully. I didn't know how bad it was," he said. "But I knew they were counting on your place as a backup." There it was. Backup. Not my home. Not my life. An asset. A contingency plan. He leaned forward. "If you'd just let me stay there for a while, none of this would have happened." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was revealing. Even now, even after legal orders, documentation, consequences, the story in his head hadn't changed. I was still the problem for saying no, not them for planning everything behind my back. "You weren't asking," I said calmly. "You were taking." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because for the first time in his life, no one rushed in to defend him. No parents, no guilt speeches, no family chorus, just reality. He tried another angle. "They're scared," he said. "They're old. They don't know what to do." I took a slow sip of my coffee. They should have thought of that before they tried to make me homeless in my own house. That landed hard. He stared at the table. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the forged paperwork, the wellness check, the assumption that I'd come back from a trip and simply accept it. Pity evaporated. "I need you to tell them something," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No." He blinked. "Just tell them." "No," I repeated. "I'm not your messenger. I'm not your mediator. And I'm definitely not your solution." That's when he said the one thing that proved everything. "So you're really just going to let them lose everything?" I leaned back in my chair. "No," I said. "They're doing that themselves." We sat there in silence. Then he stood. Didn't apologize. Didn't thank me for meeting him. Just nodded like he was filing away a loss. As he walked away, I realized something important. This wasn't a family conflict anymore. It was an extinction event. The old system where I absorbed consequences so others stayed comfortable was gone. And systems don't mourn. They resist. Later that week, I received a certified letter from my parents' attorney. Not a threat. A request. They wanted to open a dialogue. They wanted to resolve misunderstandings. They wanted to find a path forward. Every sentence carefully crafted to avoid the words responsibility or apology. My attorney responded on my behalf. There will be no further communication. All future contact will be considered harassment. Any attempt to involve third parties will be documented. End of conversation. That was the moment it truly ended. Not with shouting, not with confrontation, with finality. And something unexpected happened after that. The fear left. The vigilance faded. I stopped checking locks twice. Stopped flinching at notifications. stopped bracing for escalation. Because the truth is, people who rely on manipulation lose interest once it stops working. They don't grow, they move on. And that's exactly what they did. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened a year later, how the house stood untouched, how my life expanded in ways I never thought possible, and why the trap wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. Proof that boundaries don't destroy families. They reveal them. If you're still watching, subscribe now. Because stories like this don't go viral by accident, they go viral because someone needed to hear them before it was too late. And if you're feeling that uncomfortable pull of recognition, comment what part hit closest. Ignoring it is how people end up losing homes they thought were safe. A year later, the house was still mine, and for the first time, it actually felt like it. Not because it was quiet, or locked down, or protected by cameras and paperwork, but because nothing was circling it anymore. No contingency plans, no backup schemes, no silent assumptions that my life was available for someone else's use. The trap had done its job, and then something more important happened. It exposed the truth so completely that there was nothing left to argue about. I didn't hear from my parents again. Not through lawyers, not through relatives, not through accidental encounters. They didn't rage. They didn't beg. They disappeared. People who live off access don't stay where doors are closed. I learned later through someone who shouldn't have told me that they lost the house 6 months after our last contact. Not dramatically, not overnight, slowly. Late notices, refinancing attempts that failed, a sale that fell through, then foreclosure. My brother moved 3 times in 8 months, each couch shorter than the last, each favor thinner, because without me absorbing the fallout, the truth had nowhere left to hide. Here's the part no one warns you about. When you stop being the safety net, people don't suddenly become better, they just fall faster. And for the first time in my life, that wasn't my emergency. The house changed after that. Not structurally, energetically. I repainted the guest room they'd planned to give him, tore out the closet they'd already measured, turned it into an office, my office with a lock that existed not out of fear, but intention. I replaced the front door, not because it was broken, but because I wanted a door that had never been opened by people who didn't respect it. Friends came over, real ones. The kind who asked before sitting, who didn't snoop, who never joked about just staying a while. And I realized something quietly profound. Normal people don't plan to take from you. That realization alone rewired my understanding of family. Because family isn't who feels entitled to your space. Family is who protects it. One night, months later, I found an old voicemail while clearing storage. My mother's voice, from before everything collapsed. "You're overreacting," she said. "You always do." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Not angrily, not ceremonially, just done. I didn't need proof anymore. I had peace, and peace has a sound. It's the sound of not explaining yourself. It's the sound of not rehearsing conversations that will never happen. It's the sound of sleeping without bracing for impact. That's what the trap gave me, not revenge. Not victory, freedom. If you're watching this and thinking, I could never do that, understand this. Neither did I. Until I realized the cost of doing nothing was losing my life inch by inch while pretending it was love. If this story made your chest tighten, subscribe right now. Because the stories you ignore are the ones that come back to collect later. And if you don't subscribe, be honest in the comments. Say why. Say what fear is keeping you tied to people who treat you like property. Someone reading that might finally realize they're not crazy. They're just surrounded. This wasn't a story about a house. It was a story about permission. And once I stopped giving it away, everything changed.